Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul O'Neill, and on behalf of Kingston's Buried Treasures, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's installment of our lecture series. The subject tonight being the early stockade and its settlers, pioneers of a nation. And if our lecture series has demonstrated one thing, it really is that our community has been pioneers of a nation. And it all started with the stockade, or more appropriately, with the lowlands by the Esopus, then moving to the stockade in 1658. And as it's always good to start at the beginning, we are now, tonight, almost 2 years into our lecture series, going to talk about the beginning and the formation of the stockade and the early settlers of Esopus. And we have tonight as our featured presenter probably the preeminent authority on that subject. And many of you know Ted Dietz, or you know Ted through his many publications on early Kingston history. And Ted really has a pretty unique story. Ted was by profession a New York City police officer.
Yes.
Yes, he was. And when Ted retired in 1969, he moved his family up to Kingston. And over the years, he became more and more involved with the local historical community. And Ted's research on the early stockade has really been invaluable. And if you haven't read his books, he's got a number of books out, and they're really a wonderful primer for anyone who's interested in Kingston's early history. So it is a great honor to be able to introduce to you tonight our featured presenter, Ted Dietz.
Thank you, Paul, and thank all of you who are here today. It's nice to look out over a group and see a bunch of friendly faces, and I recognize quite a few of the faces there. You've been to some of our lectures here, and I'm sure you've enjoyed them. Tonight we're going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about that. You can talk about it too if you want. It won't bother me much. That's called the 1695 millimeter map. Called that for a reason, I guess. It was allegedly prepared in 1695. Actually, the facts for that document were gathered in 1695. Of course, not this document. There was another document that was... Well, anyway, let's talk about it for a few minutes. It was prepared by John Miller. You may not know John Miller. He was an English clergyman, born in 1666 in Scotland, went to Trinity College in Edinburgh, graduated Trinity College with a baccalaureate degree 1680, master's degree 1684, and his doctorate in 1692. In 1692, he was granted, or I guess he was awarded with a doctorate in theology. He became a minister in the Anglican Church. At the same time, he was assigned to be the chaplain to the British forces in New York Territory. New York Territory at the time, and we go back to 1692 to 1695. He had a 3-year term as chaplain to the British military here in New York State, New York Territory. New York at the time consisted of the area along the Hudson, from New York up to Albany, and then west along the Mohawk River to the Indian tribes there, the Mohawk Indians. So he was here, and he came here. He sailed in, I guess it was June or July, got here. And one of his missions was to gather information on New York Territory. He wanted to write a book. I don't know if he ever wrote the book. He did write a report. He wanted to put together a book on New York, something that would be of interest to all of us. He studied the animals. He studied the birds, the bees, and the trees, and the whatever else there was here. He was particularly interested in the religious groups that were here in the area. He paid attention to those religions that had no representation here in the form of an official church. I'm sure you all realize that back in those days, there was a Dutch Reformed church here, but no other churches were allowed to build. Peter Stuyvesant was tolerant of all religions, we know that. He was forced to be tolerant of. Those of you who know the story realize that he attempted to put the Quaker Church in Flushing, New York, out of business. But a few Anglicans from Flushing, a couple English settlers in Flushing, took the trouble to go all the way back to Holland, and they talked to the directors of the Dutch East India Company, and the Dutch East Indian Company ordered Peter Stuyvesant to let those people practice their religion. You don't have to let them build a church, but they have to practice there. So anyway, John Miller came here in 1692, arrived in the fall, and began his studies, and he was also going to study the forts, the English forts that were established along the Hudson River and along the Mohawk River. There were 5 fortifications, one at the tip of Manhattan. There was the one here in Kingston was a fort in 1692. Then there were 2 of them in Albany, and there was one more out along a place they call the Flats, which was among the Mohawk Indians. So he's studying those, and he's studying he's going to write a book. So he gathers all his information, and it's now 1695, the date he finally gathered this information. He gathers all his information, and he takes the boat to go back to England. Well, they got halfway across the Atlantic Ocean, and the merchant ship that he was on was attacked by a French privateer. So the ship was captured. All of the persons on board this ship were made prisoner, and in the commotion, he took and he got rid of all his papers. He threw all his documents overboard. So all of his documents, the 1695 document that he put together, this map, the original, went to the bottom of the ocean. Now, he was taken a captive to France. While in France, he thought, maybe I can put together some of the information. There was some ticklish information that had to do with guns, for example. There were, whether we know it or not, there were 6 guns. That's the fortified part of the Stockade here. It's down along Main Street today. We had 6 cannon in there in 1695. He didn't show them on his map. This is pretty much the map that he found. Pretty much, not exactly. We'll show you the map. You'll see the map in the handout. It has a bunch of plants in the vacant spots that you see on here. So anyway, he puts together his story, his report, submits it to the Bishop of London. The Bishop of London takes his papers and files them in the London Museum. They sat in the London Museum until 1843. My gosh, from 1695 to 1843, that's 150 years. Well, they were taken out in 1843, and I'll tell you who took them out in a minute, as soon as I look it up. All right, Thomas Rodd. Thomas Rodd was a publisher in London. He claimed the he picked up the documents, and he edited the documents, and he published the documents under the title New York. I'll get that one right for you too. New York Considered and Improved AD 1695. It's already it's 1843. Well, he put it together and sold his books starting in 1843. So the book was published in London in 1843. It was not published in New York until 1862. William Gowans of New York published the book in New York in 1862. So the first chance we had to see this map, it's a map of Kingston, was 1862, published in New York. Published in this, like this. So it was taken from London. The original document was taken from London and published here in New York. And that's how we got hold of it. We got hold of it, and writers like Marius Schoonmaker picked up on it. If you look at the Schoonmaker book on page 9, they have something similar to this. Schoonmaker didn't show all of this detail. He just had an outline of the map, and he included some of the internal streets. The original map did not have names on the streets. There were no names on the streets back in 1695. We didn't have the streets named. No official names on them. I imagine the people had their own names for them, but no official names on the streets back then. Well, that's how we were in 1865, I said. 1862. And it sat that way until 1903. In 1903, there was a historian worked for the New York Historic Association in Albany. And he decided that these maps, and there were maps of all the fortifications, these maps weren't the originals. And he decided he was going to get the original. Well, we know the original was down at the bottom of the ocean, but he was going to London to get the original. He went to London and he pulled out the notes that John Miller had placed there, and he prepared his edition. And that was done in 1903. So we have 1903 now. We have the Victor Hugo Paulsitz edition. And you'll see a picture of that in the papers that I handed you. Looks like this. Now, the difference, what I see added there are these plants in the vacant spots. You can see the vacant spots here. One there, there. Apparently, those were farm property. Now, it makes sense, too, doesn't it? If we have a fortified area, and we're going to keep the enemy out, and we may be stuck in there for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, then we've got to have food. So there's got to be some plants growing. They were there. They were present on the original, the document that he filed in 1696. What was on a 1695, I do not know. But anyway, Paulsitz gave us that particular copy. Now, on your papers, I think there's another document there that shows 4 or 5, this one. And you can see, if you look at that document, you'll see the Kingston map is in the upper right-hand corner. And that's the way it appeared. And that's the way it appears if you look at the Paulsitz book. If you get a copy of the Paulsitz book, this is the way it will appear in the Paulsitz book. But you have an enlarged copy there. So that is our document. I have some problems with this, though. It seems to me that somewhere between dumping them in the bay and then filing a copy, and then somebody else edits it, and then somebody else, and then it's been edited 3 times. Plus, I imagine that some of others of us, well, we know that Schoonmaker edited it too, because it's a slightly different document. If you look on page 9 in Schoonmaker's book, he doesn't show Wall Street cut through from, see where Wall Street is cut through from John Street to North Front Street? Not so, it wasn't so. That's an error on this map, one error that we know about on this map. Are there other errors? I don't really know, but I imagine these dark spots are supposed to be homes. I find it hard to believe that John Miller could remember exactly where each of these houses were and how many there were and how many of them were double size and how many were single size. I just don't, I find it hard. Also, I wonder about Fair Street. It's not cut through here, not cut through on Schoonmaker's book. I assume that they're probably right. It probably wasn't cut through. So I let it go there. I don't know of any other portions of that that might be an error. But I think we have enough to start worrying. But at least you have some information about this, the Miller map. Let's go on from there and let's take a look. You were told earlier, Paul told you, about the discontent that existed between the local Indians and the settlers. They were living side by side, one alongside the other. There were only 6 or 7 original settlers here in the flats, in the lower portion, farmland. There were only 6 or 7 of them there. And their farm was right alongside Native Americans' farms. And not only that, but the tribes were here right down at the mouth of the Rondout. There was a large settlement of Indians there. So there were thousands of Indians, and they're wandering through the fields. Now, you know that the Indians sold the land to the settlers, right? We all understand that. And the Dutch and the English, neither one of them, just took the land. They bartered with the Indians, paid the Indians what they were expected to pay, and then the trouble started as far as deeds are concerned. But the amount that they gave to the Indians, was it a fair deal? I don't know. It was fair to the Indians, they said so. When the English arrived, one of the first things that was done was to have a meeting with the English and with the Indians. And the Indians were asked directly whether they were satisfied with the settlement that was made over their land. Were they satisfied? They said they were. Well, maybe you should give us a few coats, or maybe you should give us a little of this, give us a few of that. The English did. And the Indians went away. They were satisfied. And then they met every couple of years after that and seemed to be satisfied. We know that North Front Street was not cut through because there was a building right here where the street is. There was a building there, and everybody here at this hall should know the building that was there. Vanderlyn home was right in the middle of Wall Street, right there, at John Street. We have no names on the streets, at least none that we know of, but there were names that were given to some of the streets. I hid them somewhere in here. Well, I know what they were. North Front Street, one time was called North Street. It was also called Gentleman Street. Why, I don't know. For some reason, apparently gentlemen spend time on that particular street. They called it Hera Street, H-E-E-R-E, and that means more than one gentleman, so there are probably 2 or 3 of them. Then, of course, we have an East Street, we have a West Street, and we have a South Street. And for a period of time, those are the names that were applied. The street here, John Street, back in those days, was called Middle Street. And some of the people called Wall Street, this portion, called Middle Street. There was an odd one in there called Low, L-O-W Street. Anybody here from the Low family? Any descendants of the Low family here? Well, the Low family owned a home along, right about in there. The Low family, where are they? Right up in here, between John and North Front Street. Crown Street was called Low Street back in those days. But of course, these were not official names. North Front Street was also called Bridge Street because there was a bridge that went across the Esopus Creek right down in here. And this was called Bridge Street then because it was attached to that. All right, let me get back to the construction of the stockade. You were told about the problems that arose between the Dutch and the Native Americans, and the settlers then called upon Peter Stuyvesant. They asked him to come up here and to deal with the Indians and to provide a military force to protect the Dutch. Well, Peter Stuyvesant came up and he said, no, we are not going to provide a military force for you. And the Dutch farmer says, but you've got to. We're citizens, and this is our livelihood, and you need it, so you got to leave soldiers here. Peter Stuyvesant was adamant, no, we will not leave soldiers here. They will be here for a period of 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks' time, you're going to have to do something to protect yourselves. And what you're going to do is you're going to build yourself a stockade and move your homes inside the stockade. They finally agreed to it, and the agreement is the agreement that's signed here. I think there was something like 9 names attached to that agreement. Am I right? About 9 names? I'm not aware. All right, don't matter. Anyway, they agreed to the idea of building a palisade, and that was in 1658, and that was on May 31st, or May 30th. May 31st, Peter Stuyvesant went to the Indians and said, I need that land. We're going to build. He told them what they would do, and they said, all right, you're going to do that? We'll give you the property. So he had an agreement from the Indians that he could have this property. He came back with the settlers and said, we got it, you got to do it, you got to move in, and you got 2 weeks in which to do it. They said, well, we can't do it in 2 weeks. He said, I'll get you help. He sent up to Albany, and he recruited carpenters to come here from Albany, and they came here 1658. There were about a dozen carpenters came down from Albany. They were sheltered down on the strand. There were soldiers came down also. So there were about a dozen soldiers and about a dozen carpenters that were all being sheltered down on the strand. And the carpenters come up here. And in 3 weeks' time, by May 30th? June 30th. By June 20th. By June 20th, they had cut down the trees in a portion of the stockade, cut down the trees, and built a stockade. Now, it's not the entire stockade. The stockade they built was only from was south of John Street, and past Wall Street, roughly about there. And then across here and here. I think I gave you the size. If not, I can give you the size. I got it here somewhere. This stockade, and it's this portion here, from there over here. It's 1/4 of the entire stockade, built in 1658, and that was built in 20 days. This was prepared in 1983 by Bob Slater. Some of you may know Bob Slater. He was the historian for the old Dutch church. He's on in years. I don't know if he's even alive anymore. He was rather ill. He did die. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. He was a great guy, real nice man. And back in 1983, he decided that we ought to find some way to see when the stockade was built. It was not built all at one time. It was built about 1/4 of the stockade at a time. This first portion, 1658. And 1658, there were no streets there. What we look on as streets today, North Front Street and Clinton Avenue, and even John Street, they were just spaces inside the stockade where the settlers were not allowed to build homes. That land was reserved, a space inside the stockade was reserved for the defense of the stockade. So there were no streets there. The original stockade, well, I shouldn't say no streets. There was one street that ran from here down to here. It was only an alley. It was a dirt driveway called Dover Street. Why they call it Dover Street, I don't know. I think I know. I surmise, but this is only me. I believe that the settlers there hunted doves on that street, and they called it Dover Street because they hunted whatever doves they could get. You all know that at one time the colonists hunted doves as a main source of food. The doves, they were carrier pigeons. They weren't actually doves. They hunted the carrier pigeon. The carrier pigeon in the United States at one time was so plentiful that when they roosted in a tree at night, you could stand underneath it, point your shotgun up, put some pebbles in there, pull a trigger, and a dozen of them would fall down. There were just so many of them. They say that when they flew over in the evening, getting time to roost, the entire skies turned black. There were so many of these birds. And you know, we eventually killed them all off. The last one died in St. Louis back around 1929. And it's a shame because it was a native bird, and well, it was done. So anyway, 1658, we completed that first section there. Nothing much happened in 1658. 1659, we did have some excitement here. In September, we had a minister came from Holland, Hermanius Bloem, was the first minister of the Old Dutch Church. And he came here in September of 1660, and he preached 1659, he was here. He preached one sermon, and the residents of the town accepted him and said, come back. He had to go back to Europe to be ordained. But he did that, and he returned in 1660. But that did happen in 1659, so that was one event. What else happened in 1659? Well, 1659, we had an uprising amongst the Indians, if you recall. Most of you know this anyway. There were several Native Americans who had been working on Thomas Chambers' farm. And after working on his farm, Thomas Chambers paid them off with an alcoholic beverage, whiskey. Gave them a bottle of whiskey. And they took and they walked over to Tannery Brook. Tannery Brook ran down the west side, this side, ran down the west side. If you're familiar with the land here, this is a peninsula. This section here, all of this, stands about 25 foot above the lowlands. The lowlands are on this side, over here, and down there. And the lowlands were swampy lands. So anyway, these Indians had their bottle of whiskey, and they settled down for a party along the creek here. They made quite a bit of noise, and that was not appreciated by the Dutch who were living inside the stockade. So some of the Dutchmen came out, and they brought guns with them, and they fired some shots. One of the Indians was killed. One of them was seriously injured. The others just ran away. But the next day, the tribe came, and the tribe started attacking this stockade here. So 1659, we had the first Esopus War. And the Indians were firing arrows into the fort. They wound up, I believe there was one person was killed, one settler was killed inside. They threw firebrands over the wall. They took the weeds that were growing, the reeds, ignited them and threw them over the wall. So there was one house was burned, and one settler was killed. At the same time, the settlers inside there decided that they had to get word down to Peter Stuyvesant. So a group of them left the fort and walked all the way down to the Strand, sent the messenger off to Peter Stuyvesant, and then they turned around and tried to come back. Well, on the way back, a group of them were captured. Thomas Chambers was one of them captured. Strangely enough, he managed to escape. Or he was let go, or maybe his freedom was purchased. But anyway, he was able to get free. Of the others, they were left to run the gauntlet. The Indians forced them to run the gauntlet. Some of them were killed. So it was not a completely happy event. Anyway, that was 1659. 1660, they decided to settle the war, and they said they're going to have peace. So they signed a peace. It was peaceful. So we're up to 1660, and 1661 comes along. 1661, they decide that that little area isn't enough. We need that much more coming on. They decided to extend the stockade from this wall here all the way over to the bank of the Esopus Creek here. And it was done in 1661. And there was another event came up in 1661. And that was Peter Stuyvesant back in the area. And Peter Stuyvesant created the village of Wiltwyck. When he created the village of Wiltwyck, he assigned a shout, swat out with shout. He selected 3 of the citizens to be shepherds. The Shepard was a judge of some sort, and I forget all three of them, but I know Schlecht was one of them, and I'm trying to think of who the others were. Rusa was another one. Evert Pels was the third. So there were three of them, and they were to be elected every year. One of them would be elected, so that there'd be two of the old ones would stay and one new one would be coming. So there would be three judges and the shout. The shout was something more than a sheriff. We tend to think of him as the sheriff, but he had responsibilities beyond being just a sheriff. So he was a sheriff, and he ran the trial, and he was paid based on the amount of money that he could collect while running the trial. So it was quite an important position. And that's 1661. So we have here 1661. Still no names on the streets. No indication of permanent names. Not even streets cut through. There were just spaces. Just space there. There were some individuals were given permission to plant in that space. They could not build a home there. They could not build anything there, but they could plant. So some of them were given land up to the stockade where they could plant vegetables. There's something else we should know about the land inside. Land inside this area here was divided into lots. Now, when exactly they were divided, I can't tell you. I think it was divided in 1661. Schoonmaker says that the list of lots was published in 1662. So whether they were published in, well, I imagine it was part of the 1661 extension, that the first 16 lots, I believe, were in there, but we can't prove it. We don't have any evidence to prove it. By 1662, we had this list out, and the list had 16 lots in the one portion, and the remainder, there were another 32 lots. Now you have a list somewhere among these documents. You have a list of the names and lot numbers. Unfortunately, we have the names and we have the lot numbers, but we don't have a location on the lots, and it was just not given to us. I got so many papers here, I don't know where they are. Anyway, let me tell you something about the lot numbers there. Among the 16 lots, these are the ones that were allocated prior to 1662. Lot number 1 was given to Thomas Chambers. There we go. See? We got it. It's efficient. Lot number 1 was given to Thomas Chambers. Anyone know where it was? You don't know where it was. I know where it was. Lot number 1 was right here. John Street was right in there. Had to be there. Chambers established a brewery, and he had to be close to water. And it had to be in the first section. It had to be in the 1658 section because it was lot number 1 in the old lots. Not only that, I traced in later deeds, I traced Chambers' sale of the lot. Those lots at his brewery eventually were sold to Henry Paling, and then eventually they became the brewery was transferred eventually to Louis Du Bois. There must be someone here who's descended from Louis Du Bois. Large family. The Du Bois family, well, he's well known down in New Paltz. He should be just as well known here. He ran that brewery for many years. He also dickered in land, sales of land. You get some of that information if you get over to take a look at the property deeds. Now, I put this book together back in, well, I don't know when, it doesn't say. I didn't put a date on it. Oh, 2010. It's called An Outline of Property Ownership in Kingston Stockade area. I spent about 6 months at the county clerk's office, sitting downstairs, going through the old deeds. If you're interested, on the first floor, you have to go to the second floor first, sign in at the property clerk's office, and then you walk downstairs. But on the first floor, there are, I think it's 3 books of translation of Dutch records. And those are the earliest deeds. They have been translated into English, so they are in English. And you can look up the earliest deeds, and they were deeds that were recognized by the court prior to 1661. Or it was even later than that. Then the deed books that succeed the TDR books were the trustee books. And there were 7 or 8 trustee books. And beyond that, there are deeds. The trustee books take you up to around 1688. And beyond that, we have deed books that have letters like AA, BB, CC, DD, up to, I think it's up to GG. And then we start with numbered books. So that's where you'll find, if you're interested in finding records, if you're interested in families, if you're interested in property, that's where you're going to find your property. If you want more information on property, I'm touting my own horn now. This was 2009. Kingston Stockade talks about properties inside the stockade. And towards the end of this book, I list the property owners inside the stockade from 1688 and then again in 1777. And they were both taken from Schoonmaker's book. So we have the stockade is now 1661. We have another extension coming on in 1670. 1670, we find an extension that brings the property up to the 1670 extension, brings the southern wall up to about where Crown Street intersects with Green Street. So that the wall here goes across, and here we have the southern wall going roughly through the center of that area there. And that probably defined the property that's now the courthouse. There was some sort of a wall there. We know that because we found a record of that wall on one of the deeds. I think it's listed in the papers that I gave you. If not, I can find it for you somewhere. Well, that was 1670. After 1670, the final extension was to this area here, and this is 1677. 1677, we still did not have names on the streets, oddly enough. The streets were cut through prior to 1677. There were streets, and we know that there were streets because there were some of the property deeds referred to streets. Prior to 1658, there was no Esopus Stockade. 1658, we found that 1/4 of the stockade built. 1661, we have the extension. 1670, another extension, 1677. Here we go. The first hint of streets in the village deeds occurred on January 2nd, 1660. That's when we found some information on a deed. And it was in Trustee Book 1A, deed number 19, and it was a grant to Johannes Hardenbrook, and mentioned his property as being a corner lot. Then on November 20th, 1664, TDR Book 2, page 83, Geronimus Ebbing purchased a corner lot, and his deed read 7 rods, 3 foot length on the street. I have this information. If anyone wants to read it, I'll make it available to you.
Thank you very much, Ted. That was excellent. And a lot of that information, as Ted said, is in the packet that he gave. And it is interesting. This is really a great map because it does show the incantation. As we said, that the original settlers had lived down here along the Esopus lowlands. And again, the original move in 1658 to the first incantation of the stockade was made based upon the forceful recommendation of Peter Stuyvesant, which the settlers, to their credit, although they had very little choice, did agree to. And again, we have here tonight the actual original document, the agreement by the settlers from 1658 to relocate to this area in accordance with Peter Stuyvesant. That, again, has been brought here, thanks to the Ulster County Clerk's Office. And yes, the Thomas Chambers' first lot was here and was subsequently occupied by Louis Du Bois, who was known as the Walloon. And Louis Du Bois really is somebody. I'm from New Paltz, and he really is one of the big names down in New Paltz. He was really the leader of the Duzine, which is the 12 patentees. But he's very unusual in that he was one of the early settlers here in Kingston. Then he became one of the founders of Hurley, then becomes one of the founders of New Paltz, and eventually, towards the end of his life, comes back to Kingston. He's actually buried today in the Old Dutch Church. And again, the extension went over to 1661. As Ted said, down in 1670, it moves down here. And then 1677 is when we really find the Stockade district that we know today. And again, the courthouse was put in 1683, right about there. So it really is an amazing place. And we still call to this day, more than 350 years later, the Stockade district. And that says so much of how important this was. And a lot of the work of where we know of the lots and how these things happen are thanks to the research for Ted. Ted went back to the Old Dutch translation. So Ted's contributions have been monumental. So Ted, again, we thank you very much for everything you've done and for tonight. That was very interesting. This again is the Miller map that we most commonly understand to be the Miller map. This is the map that is in Marius Schoonmaker's History of Kingston. As Ted said, as we look, even though the Miller map was recreated, it's also been recreated again and again and again. But again, as Ted pointed out, one of the really interesting things is that Wall Street did not go through to North Front until about 1830. And this, again, is where John Vanderlyn's home was. And it's where, due to Ted's research, we actually believe that the first courthouse was located. It would have been the minister's home, where the church meetings took place, where any schooling that did occur took place, and it was also where the courthouse was there. And that's based on research from Ted. And Ted's explanation, really, I've bought into it hook, line, and sinker. For me, I say that that's where the first courthouse was as well today. So again, Ted, thank you very much. And again, we want to thank all the people who make this our lecture series possible. First, Ted. Ted's done a lifetime of work to get to today, and he is always more than willing and more than happy to share his knowledge and the fruits of his labor. I've spent many hours with Ted going over some of the old records and things, and he's always wonderful to deal with. Excuse me. Again, I usually go through and thank everybody. We really were getting, there were so many people that we decided we should really make a slide. So again, these are all the people that really make this possible. The Senate House and the Senate House staff, we really want to thank them. Again, we wouldn't be here having this if it weren't for them. And we also want to thank them for presenting tonight the Thomas Chambers deed. The oldest document in Ulster County is the Thomas Chambers deed, and this is actually the second time that they presented this for us. So Tom Kernan and Dina Preston, we want to thank them. We also want to thank Nina Posupak, Ian Cure, and Lori Hancock. I don't know if Lori's still here, but they actually bought over from the county clerk's office this document, the 1658 agreement to relocate to the Stockade district. Again, this is document number 1 in the Ulster County Archives, and it's invaluable. So they really didn't have to bring this over, and they did, and we appreciate all of that. And all the other people, Bob and Jean Rizzo, again, we thank them for everything that they do. We make a video of each presentation. Bob has those. We have a list in the back. If you want, you can order any of those from him. And all the other people who make this possible. So again, we thank everybody. We thank you for your part in making this possible, and we hope to see you next month when our presentation is Our Buried Past, the Archaeological Treasures of Kingston by archaeologist and Professor Joseph Diamond from SUNY New Paltz. So again, thank you, and everybody have a good weekend.